It was a freezing Tuesday in November, raining so hard the streets were starting to flood, when my parents finally showed up at my house. But they were not there for a family visit. My father, Arthur, was gripping the wet iron bars of my front gate. His knuckles were completely white, and his tie was hanging loose around his neck. My mother, Beatrice, was standing next to him in the mud. Her expensive designer coat was soaked through, and she was sobbing, screaming my name over the sound of the thunder. I did not go down to open the gate. I stood up on the second floor balcony of a historic $2.5 million estate, holding a warm mug of black coffee, just looking down at them. They were begging me for a signature. They were pleading for a piece of paper, a property deed that they had spent my entire life assuming would one day belong to them. They looked pathetic, and for the first time in 34 years, I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. Before I explain exactly what was in that contract and what drove two status-obsessed, arrogant people to their knees in the pouring rain, do me a favor. If you have ever been the black sheep of your family, the one who does everything right but still gets treated like you are invisible, hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment down below and tell me where you are listening from right now. I read every single one, and trust me, you are not alone in this. Now, let me introduce you to the cast of this nightmare. My name is Clara. For 3 decades, my unspoken role in our family was simple: stay out of the way, keep quiet, and do not embarrass the bloodline. My younger sister Chloe, on the other hand, was the golden child. Chloe is 29 and married to a man named Preston Vance. If you live anywhere near Charleston, South Carolina, you know the Vance family. They own shipping fleets, massive real estate portfolios, and they hold court at the most exclusive country clubs in the state. When Chloe married Preston, my parents acted like they had just been inducted into the British royal family. Then there is me, and my husband, Julian. Julian does not wear a tailored suit to work. He has calluses on his hands and sometimes a faint trace of motor oil under his fingernails. He is a classic car restorer. He spends his days bringing rusted-out vintage Mustangs and classic Porsches back to life. He is a brilliant, hard-working man who runs his own highly successful shop. But to my mother, Beatrice, a man who works with his hands might as well be a stray dog I dragged in from the street. My parents only tolerated us because they needed an audience for Chloe's perfect, wealthy life. They made sure we knew our place at the bottom of the ladder. That hierarchy was set in stone, or so they thought, until the woman who actually held all the real power in our family decided she had seen enough. To understand how my parents ended up crying in my driveway, I need to take you back to the beginning of the end. I need to take you back to the exact same day my sister announced she was buying a luxury mansion, which happened to be the very day I tried to tell my family I was pregnant with my first child. 2 years ago, my sister Chloe got married. It was not just a wedding, it was a calculated public relations event. My parents rented a luxury yacht in Charleston Harbor. There were 200 high society guests, a live string quartet, and waiters serving imported caviar on silver trays. My parents paid for the entire spectacle. Or rather, they went into massive, secret debt for it. I found out later that my father, Arthur, took out a second mortgage on their house just to cover the floral arrangements. They were absolutely desperate to prove to the wealthy Vance family that we belonged in their elite circle. The contrast was sickening. When Julian and I got married 3 years prior, we had 40 guests in a local botanical garden. We paid for every single thing ourselves. My parents contributed $0, arrived late, and my mother spent the entire reception complaining loudly that the folding chairs looked cheap. Fast forward to a warm Sunday evening last April. We were all sitting in the formal dining room of my parents' house. The air smelled like roasted lamb and expensive red wine. Inside my leather purse, wrapped in tissue paper, was a sonogram. Julian and I were 8 weeks pregnant. After a year of trying, we were finally going to start our family. I was incredibly nervous, but under the table, Julian's large, rough hand found mine and gave it a reassuring squeeze. I waited for the plates to be cleared. I took a deep breath, reaching for my purse. But before my fingers even touched the zipper, Chloe slammed her champagne glass down on the table. "We closed on it," she squealed, clapping her hands together. "Preston and I just bought the six-bedroom estate in Mount Pleasant. It has a custom wine cellar and a private dock." The dining room erupted. My father jumped up and popped another bottle of champagne. My mother actually started crying tears of joy, rushing over to hug Chloe so tightly she almost knocked her chair over. I sat there, my hand frozen inside my purse, completely erased from the moment. I looked at Julian. He did not look angry, just terribly sad for me. He gave me a gentle, encouraging nod. I pulled the small black and white photo out of my purse and placed it on the table. "Julian and I have some news too," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We are expecting a baby, due in December." The room went dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. Chloe glanced at the sonogram from across the table, said, "Oh, neat," and immediately went back to scrolling through Italian tile samples on her phone with Preston. My father did not even look up. He just kept cutting his meat. But my mother, Beatrice, picked up the sonogram. She held it at arm's length, the way you would hold a dirty receipt you found on the sidewalk. She stared at it for a few seconds, then dropped it face down on the table. She looked right into my eyes and delivered a sentence that I will remember until the day I die. "Well," Beatrice sighed, "I suppose I will have to dig through the attic to find Chloe's old baby clothes for you. Just do not expect us to fund your nursery, Clara. You chose to marry a man who works with dirty hands. You cannot expect to live the way the Vance family does. You made your bed." I felt the blood drain from my face. My throat sealed shut. But before I could react, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the quiet room. Clink. Sitting at the far head of the long mahogany table was my grandmother, Evelyn. She was 81 years old, a woman made of iron, sharp wit, and old money manners. She lived alone in a historic, sprawling estate that my parents desperately coveted. Evelyn did not gasp. She did not yell at my mother. She simply placed her heavy silver fork down on her porcelain plate. She folded her cloth napkin slowly, deliberately. Then she raised her head and looked directly at my mother, Beatrice. Evelyn did not blink. Her eyes were sharp and calculating, filing away every single cruel syllable that had just been spoken. Julian did not cause a scene. He is far too much of a man for that. He simply stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow over the table. He picked up the sonogram, put it in his pocket, and pulled my chair back. "We are leaving," Julian said. His voice was dangerously calm. He did not wait for an apology. He took my hand and guided me out the front door. As we drove away in the dark, the rain starting to hit the windshield, I finally broke down. I cried the kind of silent, heavy tears that come from decades of feeling worthless. I thought my family had completely abandoned me. I thought I was entirely alone, but I was wrong. I did not know it yet. But sitting at the head of that dining table, Grandmother Evelyn had just started a mental countdown. She had been keeping score for 30 years, and she was finally preparing to burn my parents' fake, miserable kingdom straight to the ground. The weeks following that disastrous dinner were silent. No text messages checking on my pregnancy. No calls asking how I was feeling. My parents had effectively cut me out of the picture because my life did not fit into their glossy, high society narrative. But nature hates a vacuum, and when my mother stops talking to you, it usually means she is talking about you to everyone else. I found out through my best friend Sarah, who worked at a high-end hair salon downtown. She called me on her lunch break, sounding breathless and furious. "Clara, you are not going to believe what I just heard," Sarah said. My mother, Beatrice, had been at the salon that morning with 3 other women from her elite garden club. According to Sarah, my mother spent an hour spinning a tragic tale about how much she pitied me. She told these influential women that Julian's classic car shop was going bankrupt. She lied, straight to their faces, claiming Julian was just an unlicensed mechanic working out of a dirty garage, taking cash under the table, and that I was the one paying all the bills to keep us afloat. I felt physically sick. Every single word was a calculated lie. Julian's restoration business was fully insured, highly profitable, and entirely legitimate. He had a 2-year waiting list of wealthy clients who shipped vintage vehicles from across the country just to have him work on them. My parents knew this. They had seen his spotless workshop. They had seen the 6-figure invoices pinned to his office board. But the truth was inconvenient for my mother. She needed a reason to justify why she treated us so poorly. So she invented a reality where we were desperate and pathetic. If she painted us as losers, no one would question why we were always excluded from family events. When Julian came home that night, he was covered in dust from sanding the chassis of a 1968 Chevrolet. I told him everything. I expected him to throw something, or at least pick up the phone to scream at my father. Instead, he wiped his hands on a clean rag, walked over to the kitchen sink, and washed his hands methodically. Then, he turned to me. "Clara," he said, his voice deep and completely steady. "Lions do not lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. Your mother is embarrassed by me because I wear boots instead of loafers. That is her problem, not mine. I will never ask you to cut your family off, but hear me clearly. Our child will never be taught to feel ashamed of an honest day's work. I will not allow it." I looked at him, standing there under the warm kitchen light, and I realized how incredibly lucky I was. My parents chased the illusion of wealth, but Julian was the real thing. He was solid ground. I did not call my mother to argue. Fighting with Beatrice is like wrestling a pig in the mud. Eventually, you realize the pig likes it. Instead, I decided to focus on the one person in my family who actually operated on logic and respect: Grandmother Evelyn. I drove out to her historic estate twice a month. Her property, Oakmont Manor, was a breathtaking piece of local history, sitting on 20 acres of prime real estate. Developers had been trying to buy it for years. My father, Arthur, constantly bragged to his friends that one day he would inherit it and flip it for millions. During my visits, Evelyn and I never talked about the disastrous dinner. We drank black tea on her massive wrap-around porch, talking about my pregnancy and the books she was reading. But one Tuesday afternoon, the routine changed. I arrived at the manor, and Evelyn was not on the porch. Her housekeeper, Maria, told me Evelyn had gone out for the morning. I called her cell phone. "Grandma, where are you?" I asked, looking at the dark clouds rolling in over the trees. "I am fine, Clara." Her voice was crisp through the speaker. "I had to handle some long overdue business in town. I am actually at Julian's workshop right now." My heart stopped. Evelyn had never been to Julian's shop. "Wait, is everything okay? Did your car break down?" "My car is perfectly fine," she replied calmly. "Julian is giving me a tour. He just showed me the engine block of an Aston Martin. The boy knows what he is doing. I will see you at the house in an hour." When Evelyn finally returned to the manor, she did not say a word about her visit to the shop. She simply poured her tea, sat in her antique rocking chair, and looked out at the massive oak trees lining her driveway. But I noticed something sitting on the entry hall table that had not been there before. It was a thick, glossy folder with the logo of the most ruthless, expensive estate law firm in the state. And sticking out of the folder was a property appraisal document for Oakmont Manor. I did not know what she was planning, but looking at her sharp profile against the afternoon light, I knew a storm was coming. And my parents were standing right in its path, completely oblivious to the lightning about to strike. Before I tell you what was actually inside that legal folder, I want to ask you a serious question. If you found out your parents were secretly trying to gamble away your family's legacy just to impress strangers, would you confront them, or would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Let me know your honest answer in the comments. I have read thousands of your stories, and sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones inside our own homes. Now, let us get back to the storm that was brewing. A few weeks after my grandmother's mysterious visit to Julian's workshop, the puzzle pieces finally snapped together in the most sickening way possible. It was late August. I was 6 months pregnant, uncomfortable, and hot. My parents were hosting their annual late summer barbecue. This was not a casual backyard grill out. It was a catered networking event designed purely for my father, Arthur, to rub shoulders with the local elite. They had invited 50 people, including my sister Chloe and her wealthy in laws, the Vance family. Julian and I almost did not go. We had effectively been ghosted for months, but grandmother Evelyn called me that morning and explicitly asked me to be there. She said she needed an escort, and when Evelyn asks for something, you do not say no. The moment Julian and I walked onto the manicured lawn, the atmosphere shifted. My mother, Beatrice, was holding a crystal cocktail glass, laughing with Chloe's mother, Mrs. Vance. When Beatrice saw us, her smile vanished. She practically sprinted across the grass to intercept us before we could mingle. Clara, what are you doing here? She hissed, keeping her voice low so the guests would not hear. I did not send you an invitation. Grandmother asked us to come, I replied calmly. Beatrice's eyes darted toward Julian, looking at his clean, pressed shirt as if checking for grease stains. Fine, but please, stay near the back patio. Arthur is trying to secure a very important business deal with Mr. Vance today. Do not distract them. I felt the familiar sting of rejection, but I swallowed it. Julian simply put his hand on the small of my back and guided me toward the far side of the yard. Later that afternoon, I went inside the house to use the restroom. Passing by my father's home office, I noticed the heavy oak door was cracked open. I heard voices. It was my father, Arthur, and Mr. Vance. The initiation fee for the board of directors at the Heritage Golf Club is 1.5 million, Mr. Vance was saying. His tone was arrogant and bored. It is an exclusive circle, Arthur. You do not just buy your way in. You have to prove you have the capital to sustain the lifestyle. Are you sure you have the liquidity? Absolutely, Richard, my father replied smoothly. My mother's estate, Oakmont Manor, is being leveraged as we speak. I am taking out a commercial equity line against the property. The paperwork is being drawn up now. I will have the capital transferred by Thanksgiving. I stopped breathing. The hallway felt like it was spinning. My father was not expanding a business. He was not making a smart investment. He was trying to secretly mortgage his 81-year-old mother's historic home just to buy a seat at a pretentious country club. He was risking the roof over Evelyn's head to buy a fake title to impress his son-in-law's family. Anger, pure and white-hot, finally broke through 30 years of polite conditioning. I pushed the heavy office door open. Both men froze. My father's face turned the color of ash. You are leveraging Grandma's house for a golf club membership? I asked. My voice was shaking, not from fear, but from absolute disgust. Mr. Vance cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable. I will give you two a moment, he muttered, quickly slipping past me out the door. Once we were alone, my father's shock instantly turned into rage. He slammed his hands down on his mahogany desk. How dare you eavesdrop on a private conversation in my house? How dare you try to steal your mother's home to stroke your own ego? I fired back. It is my inheritance, he shouted, stepping toward me. It is a family asset, and I am the head of this family. You have absolutely no idea how the real world works, Clara. You married a mechanic. You live in a cramped townhouse. Do not stand there and preach to me about wealth. Get out of my office. In fact, get out of my house. He kicked me out. 6 months pregnant, his eldest daughter, thrown out of a family barbecue because I caught him trying to steal from his own mother. I walked out to the backyard. I did not cry. I was completely numb. I found Julian near the patio, grabbed his arm, and whispered, "We have to go. Now." As we walked quickly toward the side gate, I looked back toward the main lawn. Sitting under a large canvas umbrella, isolated from the fake laughter and the clinking glasses, was Grandmother Evelyn. She was looking directly at my father, who had just stepped out onto the porch looking flustered. Then, her sharp gray eyes moved to me, watching my pregnant frame being rushed out of the gate. Evelyn did not wave. She did not look shocked. She just slowly closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and set her teacup down on the table. She had seen enough. The mental countdown she started months ago had finally hit zero, and the bomb she was about to drop was going to be biblical. November arrived, bringing bitter winds and gray skies. I was 8 months pregnant, heavily exhausted, and hadn't spoken to my parents since the day I was thrown out of their backyard. The silence was deafening, but it was also a strange kind of peace. Then, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, heavy cream-colored envelopes arrived in the mail for everyone in the family. It was a formal invitation from grandmother Evelyn. She was hosting Thanksgiving dinner at Oakmont Manor. The invitation explicitly stated that attendance was mandatory for the immediate family and that Chloe's in-laws, the Vance family, were also invited as guests of honor. I knew exactly what my father, Arthur, was thinking. He assumed this was his coronation. He thought Evelyn was gathering the elite Vance family to officially announce that she was handing Oakmont Manor over to him, finally giving him the collateral he needed to buy his $1.5 million golf club membership. When Julian and I arrived at the manor that Thursday evening, the driveway was packed with luxury European cars. Julian parked his restored vintage truck right between my father's Mercedes and Mr. Vance's Bentley. He turned the engine off, looked at me, and said, "Whatever happens in there tonight, Clara, remember that we do not need anything from these people. We have each other." We walked inside. The grand dining room was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a massive table set with antique silver and fine china. My mother, Beatrice, was already playing the role of the lady of the manor. She was directing the caterers, laughing loudly, and pouring expensive wine for Mr. and Mrs. Vance. When Beatrice saw us enter, her smile tightened, but she did not dare make a scene in front of her wealthy guests. Chloe and her husband Preston barely looked up from their phones. Grandmother Evelyn sat at the absolute head of the table. She wore a tailored velvet suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. She looked like a queen holding court. She gestured for Julian and me to sit directly to her right, a position of honor that immediately made my father narrow his eyes in suspicion. The dinner proceeded. My parents spent 2 straight hours aggressively kissing up to the Vance family. Arthur talked endlessly about his upcoming initiation into the Heritage Golf Club, loudly implying that big financial moves were happening soon. Beatrice bragged about Chloe's new luxury home. Julian and I sat quietly, eating our food, totally ignored by the rest of the table. Finally, the plates were cleared for dessert. Evelyn picked up a small silver spoon and tapped it gently against her crystal water glass. The delicate ringing sound cut through my father's loud bragging instantly. The room went entirely quiet. "Thank you all for coming to my home," Evelyn began. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a quiet, terrifying authority that demanded total silence. "As many of you know, I am 81 years old. At my age, one begins to think about legacy, about what we leave behind, and more importantly, who we leave it to." My father sat up straighter, adjusting his tie. A greedy, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He actually winked at Mr. Vance. Evelyn reached beneath her chair and pulled out the thick, glossy legal folder I had seen weeks ago. She placed it dead center on the antique table. "Arthur," Evelyn said, looking directly at my father, "you have spent the last 6 months telling anyone who would listen that this estate is your inheritance. You brought bank appraisers to my property behind my back. You plan to leverage the home my husband built just to buy a piece of plastic with your name on it at a golf club." Arthur's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. His face turned completely white. Mr. Vance shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly looking very interested in his napkin. "Mother, please," Arthur stammered, his voice cracking. "This is not the time or the place. We have guests." "I invited these guests specifically so there would be no misunderstandings," Evelyn fired back, her tone sharp as broken glass. "You wanted an audience, Arthur. Now you have one." She opened the folder and pulled out a single notarized document. "2 weeks ago," Evelyn announced, her voice echoing in the silent room, "I officially transferred the deed of Oakmont Manor, along with the entirety of my late husband's $5 million trust fund. It has been signed, sealed, and legally filed. My mother, Beatrice, gasped. "Oh, Arthur, she did it! The house is yours!" she whispered loudly, clearly not understanding the tone of the room. Evelyn turned her cold, gray eyes toward my mother. "Beatrice, you have spent 30 years treating your eldest daughter like dirt because she did not marry a bank account. You lied to your social circles. You mocked a hardworking man. You worshipped money, but you forgot about character." Evelyn picked up the document and slid it across the polished wood table. It stopped right in front of me. "I did not leave this estate to you, Arthur. You are entirely written out of my will." The silence in the room was so profound, it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out. "Oakmont Manor," Evelyn declared, looking at me with a softness I had never seen before, "and the entire $5 million trust now legally belong to Clara and Julian. They are the sole owners of this property, effective immediately." Chloe dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, but no one moved. My father jumped to his feet, his chair crashing backward. "You cannot do this," he screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I am your son. That is my house. I have contracts signed with the golf club. If I do not provide the collateral by next week, I am ruined." "Then you are ruined," Evelyn said coldly, not flinching at his yelling. "You tried to gamble with my home. You lost. Clara has visited me every single week for 6 years. Julian has fixed my plumbing, repaired my roof, and treated me with more respect in 3 years than you have in 50. They know the value of this home. You only know its price." Mr. Vance, who had been sitting in stunned silence, slowly stood up. He looked at my father with absolute disgust. "Arthur," he said coldly, "did you lie to the board about having the liquid capital for the initiation?" My father started to stutter, completely panicking. "Richard, wait, I can explain. It is just a temporary cash flow issue." "We are leaving," Mr. Vance interrupted, turning to his wife. He did not even look at my parents as he walked toward the door. Chloe and Preston hastily followed, looking deeply humiliated. My mother started to cry, real, ugly tears of panic. She looked at me, sitting there in shock with the deed to a multi-million-dollar estate sitting in front of my pregnant belly. "Clara, please," Beatrice begged, her voice trembling. "Tell her this is a mistake. Your father's reputation. He will be a laughingstock." I looked at the woman who had told me to my face that I was beneath her. I looked at the man who threw me out of his house for defending my grandmother. I picked up the heavy legal deed, folded it neatly, and handed it to Julian. Then, I looked at my parents and delivered the exact same line my mother had given me months ago. "You made your bed, Beatrice. Now lie in it." Word travels fast in elite circles, and financial ruin travels even faster. Within 48 hours of that Thanksgiving dinner, my parents' carefully constructed empire of lies completely collapsed. Without Oakmont Manor to use as collateral, my father's application to the Heritage Golf Club was publicly rejected. But it was worse than just losing a membership. Arthur had already signed preliminary financial agreements, assuming the bank would clear his equity loan. When the loan failed, he was hit with massive penalty fees. To cover the debt and avoid a lawsuit, he was forced to sell his prized Mercedes and downgrade to a smaller, significantly older sedan. My mother's social life evaporated overnight. Mrs. Vance, furious about being dragged into our family drama and lied to about my father's wealth, completely cut Beatrice off. The garden club, the charity boards, the weekly brunches. Suddenly, my mother's phone stopped ringing. When your entire identity is built on what other people think of you, silence is the ultimate punishment. Which brings us back to that freezing, rainy Tuesday in November. It had been 5 days since the dinner. Grandmother Evelyn had already moved into a luxurious assisted living apartment in the city, an arrangement she had planned for months using part of her cash reserves, leaving Oakmont Manor entirely empty for Julian and me to move into. We were unpacking boxes in the massive grand foyer when the heavy brass doorbell rang. Through the security camera monitor, I saw them. Arthur and Beatrice, standing in the pouring rain outside the heavy iron gates of the estate, the gates Julian had reprogrammed to lock permanently. I walked upstairs, opened the French doors to the second floor balcony, and looked down at them with my mug of coffee in hand. Clara, please, my mother screamed over the sound of the rain. Her mascara was running down her face, staining her expensive coat. Open the gate. We need to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about, Beatrice, I called down, my voice completely steady. My father grabbed the iron bars, shaking them. He looked desperate, stripped of all the arrogant pride he had worn his entire life. Clara, please listen to me. I am drowning. The penalty fees from the golf club are destroying my retirement accounts. If you just sign the house back to me, or even just co-sign a loan against the trust fund, I can fix this. I will pay you back. I swear it. I stared down at the man who had kicked me out of his house when I was 6 months pregnant. I looked at the woman who had told her friends my hard-working husband was a pathetic loser. They were not sorry for how they had treated me. They were only sorry that they had lost. Let me make something perfectly clear so you do not ever have to stand in the rain again, I said, leaning against the balcony railing. This house belongs to me. The trust fund belongs to me. Julian and I are the legal owners. We are not a bank, and we are certainly not your bailout plan. Clara, we are your parents, my mother wailed, dropping to her knees in the wet gravel. How can you be so cruel? We gave you life. And you spent 30 years trying to make me feel completely worthless, I replied coldly. You excluded me from family photos. You mocked my husband. You ignored your unborn grandchild because we did not have a luxury brand attached to our names. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch between the thunderclaps. Julian and I are moving our lives into this house, I continued. We are going to raise our child here, and because I am not the monster you raised me to be, I am not going to issue a restraining order today. But hear this. You will never step foot on this property uninvited. If you ever speak poorly of my husband again, if you ever lie about us to your friends again, you will never meet my child. That is not a negotiation. That is a permanent boundary. Arthur stared up at me, his mouth open, the rain matting his thinning hair to his forehead. He finally realized the truth. The hierarchy had flipped. The daughter he had thrown away was now the only one holding the keys to the kingdom, and the mechanic he had mocked was now the master of the house. Go home, Arthur, I said quietly. Take care of your own debts. I stepped back inside and closed the glass balcony doors, cutting off the sound of my mother's crying. When I turned around, Julian was standing at the top of the stairs. He was holding a box of baby clothes. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just walked over, kissed the top of my head, and said, "The nursery is ready to be painted. What color do you think?" Something bright, I smiled, feeling a physical weight lift off my chest. No more dark rooms. My sister Chloe called me 2 days later. Her voice lacked the usual bubbly, annoying arrogance. The Vance family was furious with her for the embarrassment her parents had caused, and Preston was suddenly treating her very differently now that he knew she wasn't inheriting a massive estate. Clara, Chloe said quietly over the phone, I am sorry. About everything. I should have stood up for you at that dinner. I should have told Mom to stop. Yes, you should have, I replied. But apologies do not erase history, Chloe. If you want a relationship with me and your future niece or nephew, it starts with respect. No more fake smiles. No more pretending. She agreed. It was a small step, and I did not fully trust her yet, but it was the first honest conversation we had ever had. The toxic structure of my family had finally been broken. It took losing $5 million for my parents to realize they could not control the world, and it took gaining $5 million for me to realize I never needed their approval in the first place. Time has a funny way of washing away the dirt and revealing what is actually solid underneath. It has been almost a year since that Thanksgiving dinner, and the air around us feels completely different now. In late December, just a few days before Christmas, our daughter, Eleanor, was born. She arrived with a loud cry, a head full of dark hair, and her father's steady, observant eyes. Julian was the first one to hold her. I watched this massive, strong man, a man who spends his life bending steel and rebuilding heavy machinery, hold our tiny daughter with such impossible gentleness. He cried quietly in the hospital room, promising her that she would never, ever have to earn his love. My parents did not come to the hospital. I did not invite them, and for the first time in my life, their absence did not feel like a punishment. It felt like peace. They are still dealing with the financial fallout of my father's reckless ego. They had to downsize to a much smaller house across town. They occasionally send generic holiday cards in the mail, playing the role of tragic victims, but they have never once shown up to apologize in person. And I am okay with that. Some bridges are meant to be burned so the fire can light your way forward. My sister, Chloe, is slowly trying to rebuild a connection. She came over last month, sat on the floor of our living room, and played with Eleanor for an hour. She looked tired. The Vance family is exactly who we always knew they were: cold, transactional, and unforgiving. Chloe is finally learning that marrying into money does not mean you marry into a family. I do not know if we will ever be close, but we are trying to be real. And then there is grandmother Evelyn. She is 82 now. Her memory is starting to fade slightly, slipping away like sand through an hourglass, but she still spends every single Sunday afternoon at Oakmont Manor with us. Julian converted one of the massive old barns on the back of the property into a state-of-the-art classic car restoration shop. He is currently restoring a 1955 Mercedes Gullwing for a client who flew in from Dubai just to hire him. Every Sunday, Julian rolls a comfortable armchair into the center of the workshop. Evelyn sits there with a cup of hot tea, watching Julian work, while Eleanor sleeps in a bassinet nearby. Evelyn loves the smell of the motor oil and the sound of the old engines roaring back to life. She says it reminds her of a time when people actually built things to last, instead of just throwing them away when they got scuffed. Last Sunday, I was sitting next to Evelyn in the shop. She reached over, her frail hand covering mine, and looked around the beautiful, busy property she had saved from destruction. "Clara," she said softly, her gray eyes clear and focused, "I spent 30 years watching your parents value price tags over people. I was waiting for them to wake up. I finally realized that some people would rather sleepwalk through life wearing a crown of fool's gold than wake up and do the hard work of loving someone properly. You are a good mother, Clara. You broke the cycle." I held her hand tightly. She was right. Family is not just a shared last name. Family is not an obligation to tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or emotional abuse just because you share the same DNA. Blood might make you related, but loyalty, respect, and showing up for one another, that is what makes you a family. I did not win because I inherited a mansion or millions of dollars. I won the moment I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I won the moment I looked at my husband's oil-stained hands and realized they were worth more than all the country club memberships in the world. If you have made it this far into the story, I want to say thank you. If you are sitting out there right now, feeling like you are the invisible one in your family, feeling like you are constantly giving everything and getting nothing back, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not determined by their inability to see it. Keep your head down, build your life, love the people who choose you, and remember that sometimes the universe has a very satisfying way of balancing the scales. Before you leave, I want to hear from you. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Do you think my grandmother made the right choice by blinding my parents at that Thanksgiving dinner? Or do you think she should have warned them privately? There is no wrong answer, just your perspective. Please hit the like button if you believe that karma always collects its debts eventually. Subscribe to the channel to join our community, and share this with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to walk away from toxic family members. Thank you for listening. Keep building your own beautiful life, and I will see you in the next story.